My name is Dr. Rick Saguil.
And action. Hey, Jay, how did this is Kirk, man.
And action. Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick, and if this is the first time you're finding me, welcome to my channel. In the last 2 weeks, everybody's been coming up with problems with their gut. And I think it's because of the COVID isolation. If you break your wake-sleep cycle, and it's just so much opportunity to open the cupboard, open the fridge, and just go rummaging. So imagine if your dog was allowed to eat. You just put food out for like a week, and it was just there, and you trust your dog will just eat 3 times a day. That doesn't happen. The dog will eat until it's engorged, and then it'll probably throw up. And then it'll come back to it. The natural instinct of us is when there's food around, if there's nothing else to do, or we're bored, or we're lonely, or we're stressed out, the food is a temporary measure. It does elicit a hormonal response. And I'm going to present to you my argument on how to embrace healthier lifestyle and maybe decrease autoimmunity, decrease suffering. Here is a study that just talks about how the gut is not just the only place that shelters and carries a microbiome of bacteria, probiotics. You also have the nose, the mouth, the skin, the lungs, and the vagina. So bacteria is all over. And don't think of bacteria as all bad. A little bit of bacteria is bad. A little bit of virus is bad. A little bit of parasite is bad. But the majority of bacteria, there's more DNA that's foreign to you in your gut than you have normal DNA of your own cells. So that's interesting. We have evolved as an animal species to not only survive the aging process, but also to grow and harvest and cultivate this army and actually a city in the gut. It's called a microbiome. There's an ecosystem there, which I'll present to you as, if you tame the ecosystem, you have health, you live to 100. If you don't tame the ecosystem, man, you suffer like that. Everybody should know that if you're on an antibiotic for strep throat, sinus infection, colitis, skin infection, that's cool. Antibiotics are powerful chemotherapy. But if you're on an antibiotic, you should always follow up with a probiotic. But I think it's mandatory that you re-inoculate your gut when you have killed everything. So an antibiotic is targeted to kill supposedly an infection here, an infection here, an infection here, an infection here. Or infection on the skin. That's the way it works. But the collateral damage is that antibiotic goes everywhere the bloodstream goes. So you will kill the overgrowth of bad stuff here, 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 here. But you'll also kill all the good stuff that is or makes up the ecosystem. So it's important to replenish. I say 2 months, at least that's a minimum amount of time. I think a probiotic should be given to everybody for life. My usual suggestions for probiotics nowadays are you have to have at least 4 different bacteria. So if you look on a probiotic label like this one, you've got a bunch of different bacteria. You have to have at least 4. Then you have to have at least 4 billion CFUs as far as total colony forming units. This has 400 billion. That is awesome. So if there's about 1 trillion bacteria in your gut, probably more or less, 400 billion is just a mild pinch. 4 billion might not make a difference, but that's easy for me to remember 4. So 4 different bacteria, 4 billion CFUs. Every 4 months you change, and it should be less than 40 bucks. Ta-da! Yes, you have to change it up every 4 months because I think introducing a new bacteria to your ecosystem is important. Grows diversity. This is a picture of the gut acting has an influencer to our thyroid, but I present to you that the gut is actually its own endocrine response team. So you have the thyroid has an endocrine gland. You have the adrenals behind the on top of the kidneys as an endocrine gland. You have your testicles and you have your ovaries as endocrine glands. Those of you who have big tummies, that visceral fat becomes an endocrine gland as far as controlling insulin response. Well, the gut is also acts as an endocrine gland, so it can influence, as you know, or if you haven't felt it, if you've ever had to give a speech or talk on YouTube, if you've ever had to been interviewed by a large corporation to tell you that you shouldn't be doing medical cannabis or videos, then your gut starts to twist. It starts to become, oh, I'm getting upset. I just did a video with my friend Bante, a monk in Woodstock, and I had terrible pain in my gut. I was going to cancel the interview, and I just powered through. I got there, and I was so involved with his interview, amazing man, my gut pain stopped for the entire hour, in addition to a couple hours after that, no pain. So there is an influence that the brain has on the gut. There's also an influence that the gut has on hormone response. So it's very complicated, but I wanted to make it easy for you to understand. So I'm not going to get into the weeds yet, but hopefully my presentation for you will give you empowerment to dive into healing your gut. So this is information that talks about permeability. That's think of the gut as like a coffee filter. And if you make coffee, you want the essence of the coffee grounds to get into the liquid so you can drink coffee. You don't want the grounds in there because they're very bitter. So if there's a problem with the filter, then it's going to be not doing what it's supposed to do. Well, your gut's also a filter. There's something called tight junctions. Check out my videos from recent about how things get through the coffee filter. And sometimes if the coffee filter is not working properly, you'll have a bad reaction. So if the permeability of the gut is too loose and everything gets in, so if you drink stuff, if you eat stuff, if your fuel comes in and you are selective with the tube, that 27 to 36 foot tube, if it's selective and it lets in fuel and keeps out crap like pesticides, bacteria, tar, mercury, if it works well, it'll selectively let in fuel, and then you'll poop out everything bad. But if it doesn't work well, it'll let everything through, and you don't want everything through. So that's called permeability. And sometimes I guess people will refer to it in layman's terms as leaky gut. And that's a perfect analogy to the coffee filter. So leaky gut is a thing, and there is data that says that it leads to autoimmunity or is related to food allergies, food intolerances, sometimes even cancers and mood disorders. So there's great information that links it. It's not necessarily causally the reason for the disease process, but there's association. I think the data is so robust that if you can't ignore it, that there is an association. But I think that with Western medicine, if you say leaky gut to a doctor, they'll immediately think you're hippie and you eat yogurt and you're a vegan. So the idea would be just present in a gentle fashion. Hey doc, do you think this could be, unless you go to a functional medicine doctor, and they're usually expensive, but they're probably a good part of the team. Functional medicine doctor, lifestyle coach, and then maybe Western medicine doctor just in case. So, but this paper was nice because it talked about healing the gut with curcumin and glutamine. So if you know that there's certain food groups that help heal the gut, there's also certain food groups that destroy the gut. Glyphosate, the stuff you find in Roundup, sugar substitutes that are supposedly healthy are not healthy for the gut. Carrageen or other things that emulsify food, not healthy for the gut. So the gut has to have a lining and it has to have that filter. But the ecosystem that's within that lumen, it involves mucus, viscous layers of mucus. And that mucus is a combination of glycoprotein and proteoglycans and polysaccharides. Again, I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but just think of spoiled food. Lunch meat, if you keep it in your fridge too long, if you pick it up, it smells bad, but it also has a layer to it. It's slippery. And that's probably a bad analogy, but the slipperiness is where the bad bacteria hide. But the same slipperiness in the lumen of the gut is also where the good bacteria can live. So if you have a good slippery layer, if you have an ecosystem full of good bacteria, then it provides you another layer of defense to selectively allow fuel in and keep bad guys out, or at least keep bad guys corralled and then out in the poop. So that's why it's important to have fiber. I'm not going to get into fiber in this video, but ketos or carnivore practitioners have limited fiber, and I really think that you might be missing the boat as far as feeding that ecosystem. These guys, you can't just take a probiotic and assume it's going to stay. You have to have food for the fish. So if you overpack your fish tank with fish and you have no food, the fish will eat each other or muddy the water. They'll die. If you have the wrong bacteria or inoculum, then the fish tank will be poisonous. So you have to have a balance between the bacteria you introduce, the fish, and the fish food that you give to the fish. The food sources that you eat will be usually the food sources that the bacteria, the probiotics, the ecosystem, the microbiota have. So if you eat healthy and wide variety, cool. If you eat focused and targeted, you might be only feeding one species. There's about 2,000 different species in the gut. This is just a handful of different species. But if you have 2,000 and they all desire different fibers, different food groups, if you only give one food group, like you only eat McDonald's, which is essentially just processed crap, then you'll allow food for one group, and the one group is probably going to be a bad group, and that bad group will make you fat. So now we're going to talk about fecal transplant, because the data on fecal transplant is there with regards to animals. So along the same lines of getting fat with the food you eat, you would think if you just eat empty calories and drink alcohol, you will get fat. And there is validity to that. But there are animal studies that show if you take twin animals, mice, and you have one twin that is heavy and the other twin that is skinny, if you take the stool from the fat twin mouse, put it into, you take the stool and you put it into the butt of the other mouse becomes fat because of the gut microbiome. And then if you take the skinny mouse poop and you put it into the fat mouse becomes skinny. So they have done that limitedly with humans, but the data is still cursory. This is where the concept of fecal microbiota transplant comes in handy, because through the animal studies, they've applied it to humans, but they've done it in a limited sense. So specifically when you have something called C. diff, C. difficile is a bacteria you do not want an overgrowth of. So it causes pseudomembranous colitis, infection of the colon, and sometimes very tough to treat, because while you're treating the infection with antibiotics by mouth, the infection is forcing the poop to go out too fast. So the antibiotics actually leave too fast. And then the antibiotics cause irritation to the lining, which forces the poop to leave and forces the antibiotic out. So it's a tough one. Sometimes you have to go IV. Most of the time you go mouth, but it's important that it's definitely out there. There's a lot of people being admitted for that, and they're getting slammed with like 2 to 3 different antibiotics. And then that destroys the bacteria that's causing the problem, but it also destroys all the other microbiota. The bacteria that you get from a healthy donor, if you put it into somebody with C. diff, they will survive, because you have an army, actually billions of good bacteria coming in to overwhelm the few guys that are trying to grow, the bad guys. So when you have an army of good guys, it usually outnumbers the army of the bad guys. So just because of the food sources being limited. But if you can't get to that and you can't tolerate the antibiotics, then using poop from a donor that is healthy with good microbiome will also beat C. diff. So there is use for it. And because of the studies that have been done with humans, there is information that says if you use the good donor bacteria from the poop and you give it to people, you'll actually have other diseases controlled, theoretically. And here's the thing, a lot of people have disease. They're walking dead in the United States because of our lifestyle. The exclusion criteria for people who want to donate their poop, the exclusion criteria actually encompasses what most Americans suffer from. So you can't have a BMI greater than 30, metabolic syndrome, travel, antibiotic use in the last 6 months. I'm just going to read these off. Irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, diarrhea, pain, chronic pain, and any autoimmune disease. All these are exclusion criteria to donating poop. And unfortunately, so if you get poop that's really healthy from a healthy individual, then that would be good to give you the potential for healing from the inside out. The only problem is, this is like all of America. This is 2/3 of Americans that I see are this criteria. So that means that 2/3 of America is unhealthy and cannot donate poop, but 1/3 of America is healthy and can be your savior. It sounds weird to get somebody's poop put in you, and it's hard to find a GI person, gastrointestinal specialist, that'll do it. Nobody that I know at Sherman Hospital does it. I'm searching out to find other people. You can also do it another way. You can take crapsules. Weird, and that's a tough sell, I think, but I guess if you're suffering, you will try anything. Crapsules have crap from other people, but they do have, that's good bacteria, to repopulate your gut. So if you don't like to take an enema or a GI colonoscopy where they deposit poop from a healthy donor, and you don't want to take the crapsules, I think this paper indicated that you can, instead of doing a fecal microbiota transplant, you can consider doing targeted re-inoculation of your gut. The question is, that's microbiome therapy, personalized. The question is, how do you figure out what you're missing? How do you figure out what you have too much of? And how do you figure out which bacteria, which probiotic to get? I just grabbed this one because it was the largest amount that I could see. It's really expensive, but it's only 5 days. As far as figuring out target and what to take, doctor's data. This place is pretty cool. Not covered by insurance, but if you wanted to get a nice picture of, this is a picture of the bacteria that they'll analyze in your stool. And Doctor's Data is based out of St. Charles, Illinois. Don't go there, they won't let you in, but that's where it's near Zenleaf, right behind Target on North Avenue. But pretty cool, they have all the bacteria that they'll line up this is a pretend patient sample, a data sheet. They'll analyze and figure out what bacteria you have. They'll even have suggestions from their professionals as far as if there's too much of one, not enough of another. And then at the end of this thing, which is really cool for providers, it does give you a little bit of an analysis about how to interpret the data. Pretty cool. And there's other companies out there that'll do stool analysis and sometimes even other chemicals in your poop, but I like Doctor's Data and it's local. Once you have a template of or a target of what to attain, then it's easy. Then you just have to take the inoculum, but it's not just taking probiotics. So this, I said, was expensive, like 35 bucks for 5 days only, but it's the largest amount I could find. You also have something called VSL double strength number 3 that has been studied in Chicago, at least, for ulcerative colitis. And I think that's really expensive. It used to be covered by some insurances. I can't get pre-authorization clearance by any insurances nowadays, but this is a nice substitute. The VSL double strength number 3 comes in powder form, and you take a little bit of powder every day and you keep on re-inoculating your gut. This is, because it's expensive, I could probably get more, but I'd go broke. So 35 bucks for 5 days, fine. But this is how I'm going to do it. So hopefully this gives you a lot of information. I'm going to be hitting the Prolon. This is a new Prolon box I have. This is a 5-day fast. So what happens with fasting is that you essentially starve. You just take whatever's in each box 5 days and you're done. So it's effortless, it's mindless, you just do it, and it's novel too, it's fun. But versus you just starving. So you have your food system for 5 days and you essentially contract the gut microbiome. So when you go through starvation, everything shuts down. Just like COVID, everything shuts down business-wise. So if the gut shuts down, not only does the function decrease to preserve energy and make it through the starvation times, but the gut microbiome shuts down. So the theory is all the riffraff, all the bad cells will usually die off. The good guys will survive. And sometimes they'll give you stem cells. You yourself will create stem cells to the thyroid, to the skin, to the mind, to the muscle. You'll create stem cells when going through contraction and starvation. And then when those stem cells are fed again after the 5th day of this is why Bolter Longo is brilliant. After the 5th day, when you refeed, those stem cells that were produced start to repopulate and they make muscle new, they make brain new, they make thyroid new. They move away and kill off all the cancer, precancer cells, senescent cells. That's why it's brilliant. But what I wanted to do on the 4th and 5th days of this 5-day fast is inoculate. If I introduce this, hopefully my gut tolerates it, introduce this to a contracted state of microbiome or a population, when the stem cells start to get refed, you got this overwhelming amount of good army that starts to blossom and becomes I'm hoping becomes the dominant force in the gut to influence the way it works as an endocrine gland, the way it works to support the thyroid, the way it works to pick out the fuel for muscle, and the way it works to heal the gut and control a mood. So that's my presentation. If you have any comments on what you take, please put them down below. Thanks for watching up until this point. Otherwise, I'll see you at the next video.